Imagine opening your eyes in complete darkness. Not the darkness of a bedroom with blackout curtains or a power outage that will be fixed in a few hours, but the deep natural darkness that covered the world before electricity existed. There is no alarm clock on a bedside table, no smartphone glowing with overnight messages, no distant hum of traffic outside your window. Only the quiet crack of old wooden beams settling in the cold and the faint whistle of wind slipping through tiny gaps in the walls. For a moment, you stay perfectly still beneath a pile of heavy wool blankets, trying to gather enough courage to leave what little warmth remains. The room is bitterly cold. Every breath hangs in the air as a pale cloud. Your hands are stiff, your nose feels frozen, and even moving your feet from beneath the blanket seems like a challenge. You know exactly what awaits you the moment you stand up, because it is the same every single day. This is not a special occasion. It is not a disaster. It is simply an ordinary morning in colonial America. For millions of people living in the American colonies during the 17th and 18th centuries, every day began long before the sun appeared above the horizon. Life followed the rhythm of nature instead of the numbers on a clock. When daylight was your most valuable resource, sleeping after sunrise meant wasting precious hours that could never be replaced. Every minute of daylight mattered because every task, from preparing food to planting crops, repairing tools, caring for animals, and gathering firewood, had to be completed before darkness returned. Today, most people wake up with the simple press of a button. A warm house surrounds them. Clean water flows instantly from a faucet. Coffee begins brewing automatically before they even leave bed. Within minutes, breakfast is ready, lights fill every room, and the day begins with comfort that feels completely ordinary. But in colonial America, comfort was a luxury very few people ever experienced. Before you could think about eating, before you could think about work, and certainly before you could think about resting, you first had to make sure your home could survive another day. Every morning started with a series of small but essential tasks that modern people rarely consider. Forgetting even one of them could make the rest of the day dramatically harder, or even dangerous during the harsh winter months. Most colonial families lived in simple wooden houses that were far smaller than the average home today. Many consisted of just one or two rooms shared by the entire family. Parents, children, and sometimes even grandparents slept under the same roof with very little privacy. Furniture was limited. Beds were often handmade, filled with straw, corn husks, feathers, or rough wool. Over time, these materials became lumpy, damp, and uncomfortable, but replacing them was expensive, so families simply learned to live with them. The walls provided only limited protection from the weather. Even well-built homes allowed cold air to creep inside during winter. In poorer households, snow could drift through tiny cracks, and rain often found its way inside during storms. A warm house depended almost entirely on one thing: the fireplace. The fireplace was the heart of every colonial home. It provided heat, light, a place to cook meals, and sometimes even hot water. Without it, daily life became almost impossible. But unlike today's heating systems that quietly worked through the night, colonial fireplaces slowly burned down while everyone slept. By dawn, only a few glowing embers often remained beneath a blanket of gray ash. One of the first people awake each morning usually faced an important responsibility: bringing the fire back to life. It sounds simple today: strike a match, turn on a stove, press a button. None of those options existed. Instead, someone carefully knelt beside the cold fireplace and searched through the ashes for tiny red coals that had survived the night. If they were lucky, those glowing embers could be coaxed back into flames using dry tinder, kindling, and carefully placed firewood. The process demanded patience and experience. Blow too hard, and the fragile ember might disappear forever. Add thick logs too soon, and the small flame could suffocate beneath their weight. If the fire had gone completely cold overnight, the situation became much more difficult. Starting a new fire from scratch was slow, exhausting, and sometimes frustrating, especially when the wood had absorbed moisture from rain or snow. In some communities, neighbors even borrowed hot coals from one another rather than beginning the entire process again. Only after the flames finally returned would warmth slowly spread through the room. But even then, it could take hours before the house felt truly comfortable. Until then, everyone simply endured the cold. Outside, the world was beginning to wake as well. The first sounds were not car engines or school buses. Instead, roosters crowed across the countryside. Dogs barked at distant noises. Horses shifted inside their stables. Cows waited to be milked. Chickens scratched at frozen ground, searching for food. Every sound was a reminder that the day had already begun, and every living creature depended on human hands before the sun climbed high into the sky. There were no weekends waiting at the end of the week, no paid vacations, no mornings to sleep in simply because you felt tired. Illness, bad weather, or exhaustion rarely stopped the work. Crops continued growing, animals still needed feeding, firewood still had to be gathered, water still had to be carried. Survival never paused, and neither could the people who depended on it. For many colonial families, the morning was the most important part of the entire day. The choices made during these first few hours determined how smoothly everything else would unfold. A slow start could mean unfinished work before nightfall. An unfinished harvest could mean less food for winter. A neglected animal could become sick. A forgotten chore could create problems that lasted for weeks. Life was built upon routines that had been repeated thousands of times, generation after generation. These routines may seem exhausting by today's standards, yet they represented knowledge earned through experience. Every parent taught these habits to their children because one day those children would be responsible for keeping their own families alive. As the first rays of sunlight finally appeared through the tiny windows, the house slowly came to life. Blankets were folded away, boots touched the cold wooden floor, quiet voices replaced the silence of the night. Another ordinary day had begun, not with comfort or convenience, but with determination. And before anyone could even think about breakfast, an even longer list of chores was already waiting. The first challenge of the morning wasn't preparing breakfast. It wasn't getting dressed or planning the day's work. Before almost anything else could happen, the family needed fire. As the last glowing embers hid beneath a layer of gray ash, someone carefully knelt beside the large stone fireplace. Often this responsibility fell to an adult who had learned through years of experience how to bring a dying fire back to life. They gently pushed the ashes aside with an iron poker, searching for even the smallest hint of red. A single glowing coal could mean the difference between a quick start and a long, frustrating morning. If a few embers had survived the night, they were carefully surrounded with dry tinder, small pieces of bark, dried grass, or wood shavings saved for exactly this purpose. Gentle breaths fed the tiny glow until a thin ribbon of smoke appeared. Slowly, a small flame emerged. Thin sticks were added one at a time, followed by larger pieces of split firewood. Rushing the process could smother the flame, forcing the family to begin again. But not every morning was so fortunate. Sometimes the fire had died completely during the night. On damp mornings when the wood held too much moisture, starting a new fire demanded patience and determination. Before modern matches became common, creating a flame could be slow and difficult. Every successful fire was the result of skill rather than convenience, and families valued it as one of their most important daily necessities. As the flames slowly grew, they filled the room with flickering light. Shadows danced across the rough wooden walls while the bitter chill began to retreat, though only little by little. The warmth spread unevenly. Those closest to the fireplace felt its comfort first, while the far corners of the house remained cold for much longer. The fireplace was far more than a source of heat. It was the center of family life. Meals were cooked there. Water was heated there. Clothes were dried beside it after rain or snow. During long winter evenings, families gathered around its light to eat, talk, mend clothing, or quietly prepare for another demanding day. While the fire came back to life, the rest of the household rarely stood idle. Blankets were folded and stored neatly to protect them from dirt and moisture. Beds were straightened, even if they would be used again only a few hours later. Every item inside the home had value. Nothing was treated carelessly because replacing even simple possessions required time, money, and hard work. Outside, the farm was already waiting. The morning air bit at every exposed hand and face as someone opened the heavy wooden door. The smell of damp earth, smoke, and fresh air rushed inside. Dawn painted the sky with soft shades of gray and pale orange, while a thin layer of dew, or frost during colder months, covered the ground. The animals could not wait. Cows needed milking before the day grew warm. Chickens had to be fed and their eggs collected before predators found them. Horses required fresh water and hay before they could begin the day's work. Pigs squealed impatiently from their pens, expecting breakfast just as reliably as the people inside the house. These animals were not simply companions, they were essential to survival. Cows provided milk, butter, and cheese. Chickens supplied eggs and meat. Horses pulled wagons and plows. Sheep produced wool for warm clothing. Every animal represented food, labor, or income, making their care one of the family's highest priorities. Ignoring these chores, even for a single morning, could have serious consequences. While some family members worked outside, others turned their attention to another daily necessity: water. There was no faucet to turn, no sink waiting in the kitchen. Fresh water had to be carried by hand, often from a nearby well, spring, or stream. Wooden buckets, heavy even when empty, became much harder to carry once filled. During winter, the journey could be especially difficult as icy paths made every step uncertain. Yet the water was needed for nearly everything: drinking, cooking, washing, cleaning, and caring for both people and animals. This simple task was repeated not once, but many times throughout the day. Every trip demanded physical effort that modern households rarely consider. As sunlight slowly spread across the countryside, more homes came to life. Thin streams of smoke rose from chimneys across the village, each one marking another family beginning the same familiar routine. Though neighbors lived separate lives, their mornings often looked remarkably alike. Everyone raced against the same clock, the rising sun. The hours after dawn were the most valuable of the entire day. Every minute lost could mean unfinished work before darkness returned. By now, the fire burned steadily. The room felt warmer than it had an hour earlier, though still far from comfortable. The smell of burning oak filled the house, mixing with the scents of damp leather, fresh wood, and the cool morning air drifting through the doorway. Only after the fire was burning, the animals had been cared for, and fresh water had been brought inside could the family finally begin thinking about breakfast. But even that would require more work than most people today could imagine.